welcome to the fourth of 6 videos from the Roman Army 2021 UofW lecture on unit organization. And in this fourth video, I'm going to say a little bit about where the legions were and sort of how we know this, which gets into some of the sources I'm having you read for this week. And I will, again, lean in much of this discussion in the next video on the Moesians again. Okay, so where were they at any given time? So we have all these legions in the provinces, and where were they specifically? Well, here is another map of the Roman Empire. Okay, this one has lots of color found on the line with community comments. You can see the names of various places, deserted Africa, people, the Mori and the Sarmatians, and the names of bodies of water, the Black Sea and the Eternal Sea. And there are lots of roads in red and places, provinces and cities, okay, Tarraco, Aquitania, and then also other things too to indicate legionary bases. So these little purple dots, squares, show you where the legions, and you can see them scattered in Britain and along the Rhine, and then over parts of the Danube, and up into Dacia, and then down through the eastern frontier as well, and beyond. Okay, so that's overall where they were. But we know in part, well, we know this in part because the archaeology. Okay, lots of excavations in lots of regions have revealed a lot of material to do with legionary bases, and they change over time, and both the structures change and which units were housed in an individual fort. Sometimes forts were abandoned, earlier than you might expect. Sometimes they started building massive ones and they abandoned those prospects. Forts were we're going to come back to forts, but initially temporary things, and they become more permanent. So we have some literary sources that tell us a little bit about how the legionary disposition of the empire changed over time. We have smaller pieces of evidence too, but one of the earliest ones, and this is under the imperial period when they became a permanent thing, based in various provinces. We have this account in Tacitus' Annals 4.5 that dates to around 23 CE. And based on this Tacitus information, we know that in the Rhine there were 8 legions, in Spain there were 3, in Africa 2, Egypt 2, Syria, Euphrates 4, Danube 4, Dalmatia 2. Okay. Now we also know that things change over time, and the great thing about these 3 main sort of pieces of information is we can see how legions roughly shifted, at least in quantity, from one area to another based on a number of factors like perceived need. So we have this inscription from Rome, which dates to some point in the 2nd century CE, we think, and gives us a list of legions, roughly based on their names, based on where they are. And in this one, we can see, for instance, Britain, there are 3 legions. Okay, in Germany, there are 4. If you remember over here, there had been 8 on the Rhine, but this also includes Noricum and Rhaetia, so still 6, but less than before. Italy, 1. Surprised it hadn't been for a while. Then we get to the Danube, and there are quite a few. Okay, there are 3 in Pannonia, 1 in Upper Pannonia, 1 in Lower Pannonia, 2 in Upper Moesia, 3 in Lower Moesia, so 5. 4, it's 9 compared with the 4 from before. Okay, and then there's places like Dalmatia, and if you look over the east too, there's quite a few more than before. So there are 2 in Cappadocia, 3 in Syria, 2 in Mesopotamia, etc. So a shift in them, and it tells us where certain ones were at certain times, roughly in the middle of the 2nd century, maybe in the second half of the 2nd century. Then we can also get another piece of evidence for Cassius Dio, okay, writing in the 3rd century CE, 55-23 of his Roman history, one of the more extensive parts of his fragmentary Roman history. And he talks a bit about how what the military disposition was when Augustus was emperor, and he mentions what it was like in his day, in the early 3rd century CE. And from him we get more. There's 4 legions in Britain, we're down to 3 in Germany, and still a significant number over in Pannonia and Moesia, and many more besides. So those 3 pieces of which give us a broad sketch of the legionary emplacement, give us some idea of where they are, and they're sort of spread out, as I said, in all those places, and we can use this information to see how it changed over time. Okay, so that's a short video on where the legions were during the provinces, and then they shift from time to time too. The last thing I will say, because it's worth drawing attention to this, that when they did shift, Usually it was a case of, sometimes it was a case of, if it was like a wartime situation, extra legions were needed for a conflict. Often they would come from a neighboring place. So there'd be like a gradual shift in the entire system. So even though each province had its own legionary complement and auxiliaries too, so responsible for its own actions, ultimately it was part of a larger system. And if there's a shift, say, towards legions in Lower Moesia, you might get ones moving from Upper Moesia or Pannonia, and then other ones moving along to compensate for this. Okay, and then only in some circumstances would they raise new legions. And there are very few points in the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd century CE where that happens. Okay, that's the 4th phase.